Gears 5 is in a weird place for me. On one hand, it has the tightest shooting of any Gears game, or any third-person cover shooter for that matter. It takes the formula that was established back in 2006 with the first game and makes several small but impactful improvements on it. But on the other hand, it feels like a game that's too stuck in the past, simultaneously too afraid to try new things while flirting with a few much-needed fresh ideas. For context, I've played all of the Gears of War games except number 4. I gave that one a miss because I didn't have an Xbox One at the time, and the story and characters didn't inspire me to get one, so I settled for gameplay and story walkthroughs on YouTube. As with the previous titles in the franchise, Gears 5's biggest triumph is in its campaign. After the largely lackluster Gears of War 4 did little to justify its existence, Gears 5 may have dropped the "of war" from the title, but it certainly doesn't drop the ball. It definitely has some hurdles to overcome, but it reminds gamers why Gears is one of Microsoft's tentpole exclusive franchises. Players were introduced to a newer, younger Delta Squad in Gears 4, with JD Phoenix leading the way as the son of the legendary Marcus Phoenix, a fact which mainly served to highlight that he was little more than an all-American cardboard cutout. Taking the reins this time is KAIT DIAZ, the franchise's first female lead character, a woman with a mysterious personal connection to the Locust and the Swarm, and an anti-fascist chip on both shoulders. She's got a bad attitude and a worse haircut, but her tortured mind makes her stand out from the guys who look like a burst-open can of Spam. KAIT is played by the always excellent Laura Bailey, who gives the character a fierce strength, undercut by a deep sense of vulnerability. She struggles to overcome her personal demons even more than her enemies on the battlefield, and that alone makes her more interesting than a lot of her contemporaries. She may not have the meathead, wisecracking charm of the original 4 lads, but she's certainly a step up from the disappointedly one-note JD. Speaking of JD, he gets a decent bit of character development in the opening act and a drastic visual redesign, making him more than just a Nathan Drake knockoff. Unfortunately, all of this development is pretty much undone when he rejoins the team in Act 3 with no real tension or conflict, just a few bitter lines of dialogue from KAIT and Del, and then all is forgiven. Del is the third key member of Delta Squad who accompanies KAIT throughout her journey as an AI or human companion. He's smart, resourceful, and boyishly charming, but lacks the edge to make him more memorable, like the obnoxious arrogance which helped make Baird a true fan favorite. Baird joins Marcus and others from the original trilogy at various points throughout the campaign, but they never feel like a crutch to the new characters, allowing Del, JD, and in particular KAIT to carve their own paths through the story and a few Swarm while they're at it. The Swarm are the returning enemies from Gears 4, but we still don't really know that much about them or what they want. Part of what made the Locust a compelling foe in the original trilogy was that they weren't fighting just to conquer the world, they were fighting to survive, freeing their homeland underground. The question of who the Swarm are and why they want to curb stomp humanity into the Earth is still a mystery 2 games in. A major fault with the Swarm is how similar they are to the Locust, meaning that we still get many of the same enemy types with a lack of significant variation. Leeches effectively act as tickers, but less original, and if you have Krill but take away the darkness and horror associated with them, you have Phlox. One standout is the Matriarch, an evolution of the terrifying Berserkers from the original games. While she isn't half as scary, she still makes for a thrilling encounter as you shoot out the ice beneath her feet, dunking her in freezing water as opposed to scorching her as one would her predecessors. Environmental options like this fit Gears' destroyed beauty aesthetic perfectly, and will hopefully become a more prominent focus of the gameplay in the future. And utilizing the environment is even more fun with weapons like the Lancer GL, which comes with a grenade launcher attachment to rain hell on the poor souls you're aiming at if the old reliable chainsaw just isn't cutting it. Plunging the Swarm into ice is always satisfying throughout Act 2's Arctic Tundra, and it is during this act where Gears 5's campaign opens up into the non-linear game world. It certainly isn't an open world in the way we've come to know it with Ubisoft or Rockstar games, but it's closer to the Madagascar section of Uncharted 4 or Metro Exodus's mission design. The game, at least in this open section, doesn't fall into the open world traps that befall so many others, but calling it a sandbox is a bit of a stretch. The player has control of where they go in the map, but it's still a long and narrow environment as opposed to a wide open field of play. Combat encounters still unfold in the traditional Gears way, although this time some very simple stealth mechanics can be employed which help spice things up somewhat. Ultimately, Gears 5 doesn't manage to realize the full potential of moving to an open-ended level format, and while it's a novel treat in Act 2, by the end of Act 3 it begins to slog as it hits the usual open world barriers and the story becomes stretched thin, forcing you to backtrack. Having just 2 characters on the skiff during Act 2 makes for a closer personal relationship between each of them and the player, which is lost in Act 3 trilogy as JD and newcomer Fars reform the squad. Fars is played as brutally British as possible by iZombie's Rahul Kohli and, despite being a rather charming bloke by all accounts, effortlessly plays Fars as an overly entitled, total douchebag.
Hang on a second, shitstick.
Now for a very, very mild spoiler, Act 3 also brings the return of an older Gears character from a less popular entry to the franchise, who may not be a fan favourite but was still a welcome sight to see for the long-standing Gears fan. Acts 2 and 3 do feature optional side quests which are completely non-essential to the main plot, but can provide you with interesting character insights and upgrades for your personal robot / skeleton key, Jack. Jack finally makes his long-awaited return to the franchise and, just like R2-D2, comes with a whole host of new bells and whistles. In the original games, Jack's sole purpose, outside of being an adorable floating robot of course, was to open doors and hack computer terminals. R2-D2 in the original Star Wars trilogy could do pretty much the same stuff, but when the prequels rolled around he had about a dozen extra gadgets that he never used again. In Gears 5, Jack can provide support to the player by cloaking or shielding you, he can zap enemies or buff your health, and fetch weapons or ammo from the battlefield and bring them back to you. All of his abilities can be upgraded with components found in the world, but I couldn't help feeling how great it would be to have this sort of progression with your character as a player. And that's part of the reason Gears 5 feels dated. For many gamers or hardcore Gears fans, this won't be an issue because it's even more of what you already loved about the franchise, but for others it may feel too much like a game you played over 10 years ago. Although if you're not a Gears fan, this entry has been touted as the most accessible Gears game to date. From building an ethically diverse cast of characters, one of whom is also disabled, and featuring pride flags for multiplayer, to having one of the most accommodating campaign tutorials I've ever seen, the game does a great job of making itself more enjoyable for anyone. Before beginning the game, players take control of Dell in a tutorial framed around trying out new tech for Baird. To veterans, this may feel patronising, but it's a harmless addition that will benefit the uninitiated. The same can't be said for the multiplayer modes. Horde is possibly the greatest thing to come out of the Gears franchise, and comes with a bunch of new mechanics and features this time around. Being familiar with the wave-based mode from the previous titles will help, but if not, you had better check the tutorial in the help menu, which you'll have to access manually. The way Horde mode works is simple. A team of 1 to 5 players must survive 50 waves of increasingly difficult groups of enemies, and every 10th wave there will be a boss wave with even more challenging adversaries. Every kill nets you power, a currency which can be spent on fortifications such as turrets, barriers, or decoys, which can be bought from the Fabricator. The major evolution in Horde 4.0 is having characters in specific classes with unique loadouts and abilities. These are all fairly standard, with tanks, scouts, engineers, etc. Each character will progress individually and unlock enhanced abilities, in addition to your overall player level, which grows across all multiplayer modes, which is ultimately meaningless. You don't unlock anything new for leveling up. Now on the topic of Gears multiplayer, anyone who's been watching the channel for a while will know that I'm not a multiplayer gamer. And did Gears 5 change my mind? Gears multiplayer has always been about rolling and blind firing with Nasher shotguns, and for the most part that's exactly the same. However, the arcade deathmatch mode does make for a nice change of pace, because each character has a set loadout and you can purchase new weapons by accumulating kills. This forces most players into using a variety of different weapons and keeps things ever changing. Forget strawberry or raspberry or even marmalade, cooperative and PvE experiences have always been my jam. The new escape mode for Gears 5 fits that mold, and when it goes well, it's a whole lot of fun. The name of the game here is that a team of 3 hivebusters have set off a chemical weapon in the swarm hive and now must escape before it goes off. This can be an intense tactical experience so long as everyone is on the same page. As soon as one idiot roadie runs through a room of fully armed enemies, alerting every single one, things immediately start to roll downhill. Each player starts off with just a sidearm and limited ammo, with the next step being to work together with your scarce resources to acquire better weapons to press forward. As soon as GG Noob Killer XX jumps the gun and gets himself killed, and probably you too if you try to save the damn fool, it can be game over faster than you can say tactical reload. My main problem with Escape is that I wish it was longer, with more areas to advance through, and that the encroaching toxic venom put more pressure on you to keep moving, but I expect something like this will come with the new seasonal Operations. Operations is Gears 5's word for seasonal content updates. This will bring new unlockable cosmetics, multiplayer maps, and challenges to Gears 5 for free. The monetization of Gears 5 is where things start to get dirty, and not in the Friday night in with your mother kind of way. It's no worse than any other multiplayer game, but nonetheless, there is still an extensive grind for cosmetics and card unlocks, with pathetic dribble of premium currency awarded for free. The in-game cosmetic store features exclusive items that can only be acquired with real purchases, and the non-paid items take serious grinding to achieve. Gears 5 adopts its own version of the Battle Pass, known as Tour of Duty, featuring challenges which reward players players with stars which eventually yield character cosmetics. There are 3 challenges at any one time, but once one is completed, you have to wait for it to reset or pay with in-game currency to roll for a new one. So you'd better get your wallet out if you want to get what you want in a reasonable time frame before the Tour of Duty is updated with the next operation. Again, other games have monetization just like this, sometimes even worse, but it's still worth mentioning all the same. Every multiplayer match you play, whether it's in Versus, Horde, or Escape, will net you supply. Match after match, your supply will accumulate, and then eventually you will get a supply drop, which will feature an in-game cosmetic like a mark or a banner. But it's totally random, so it's one step away from just being a loot box. But despite the multiplayer problems, Gears of War is best known for its story, and Gears 5 takes players on a much more personal journey. The around 12-hour story follows KAIT as she uncovers her connection to the Swarm, and it's this story beat that is so compelling and sets her apart from her squad mates. In the final moments of Gears 4, players discover that KAIT has a medallion emblazoned with the Locust symbol, suggesting that there's more than meets the eye with young Ms. DIAZ. Act 1 sets the stakes and establishes the overall mission for KAIT and the rest of Delta Squad, but much of the story, especially in the first half, is devoted to her personal journey. But the problem is that her interesting story is put to one side at the end of Act 2, and what follows is a far more by-the-numbers extended fetch quest, which is a real shame. Once things become more linear and focused again in the 4th and final act, we see a bit more of KAIT's growth as a person coming through, but an abrupt cliffhanger ending, just like in Gears 4, doesn't do her character justice. Whatever she gets up to in Gears 6 should be pretty interesting, as the stage is set to be a huge all-out war with the Swarm alongside her personal motivations and goals, but it's a shame we couldn't get more of that here. A redundant binary choice in the penultimate chapter doesn't do much to propel the story forward either, because both result in pretty much the same outcome, leaving it to feel more like a cheap attempt at stirring up tension. Having the element of choice here is pointless and would have been better served as a fixed narrative point to solidify the weight of the moment. That said, there are plenty of strong character interactions, particularly between KAIT and the rest of Delta Squad, and JD and his dad Marcus, but some of the most interesting narrative threads are squandered in the 3rd act. Gears 5 does manage to strike a really nice balance between these meaningful character moments and visceral, bloodthirsty action, but it's yet to fully capture that Saving Private Ryan level of intensity and thought-provoking storytelling that I believe the series is capable of. Gears 5 is easily the best Gears in terms of core gameplay, even with the lack of significant innovation. If you've enjoyed Gears in the past, you've probably picked this one up already and are loving it. If you're looking for something to reinvent the wheel, you certainly won't find it here, but you might just scratch that itch in the way that only a chainsaw bayonet can. In fact, there are 3 slightly different versions of the original answer that you can choose from to get right to that sweet spot. Gears 5 is absolutely one to pick up if you're an Xbox One owner. It has the best shooting of any game like it, and it's more accessible to newcomers than ever. Despite numerous microtransaction concerns, the multiplayer feels like Gears multiplayer. If that was fun for you, then you've got more of the same. If you don't know what any of that means, then you better get ready to be repeatedly cut in half by a shotgun.
I'd like to keep this handy for close encounters.
Escape is a fun little addition, especially in a team, even if it's a bit flat at the moment. Horde 4.0 steps it up yet again, and the addition of unique character classes was an excellent choice to give players a reason to choose different characters. And finally, KAIT has an interesting story to tell, even though it's perhaps not told in the best way. It's the most colourful and visually stunning Gears to date, and even though it does have its various problems, I can't wait to rev my chainsaw bayonet and dive straight back in feet first into the blood and guts of my enemies. But anyway, that's just what I think about Gears 5. Please be sure to let me know down in the comments below what you think. Has it innovated enough, or is it just the same old brown shooter it always was? Make sure you leave a like, hit that subscribe button and the bell to stay notified when we release a video next. I've been Henry, this has been Pretty Good Gaming. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.